Ouija boards have long been a supposed way to connect with spirits and demons. They're sold in most board game aisles and toy stores, and work by one or more participants placing their hands on a plastic or wood piece called a planchette with a small glass circle in it, which is used to highlight a single letter on the board. The participants are then supposed to ask any question, and the piece is supposed to move to form answers out of the letters, supposedly by spirits. The game is normally played as a gag within groups of friends, and the piece is usually moved by one of the participants as a joke, or even unintentionally. However, there are countless stories of people who claim to have actually contacted demons and had serious repercussions because of it. Number 6. A mother and daughter who were reportedly told during a Ouija board session that they would soon die were both critically ill in the hospital following a fire at their home, which was engulfed in flames mere hours after the Ouija board made its grim predictions. The two were treated in a hospital after the fire. It's said that the mother and daughter used the Ouija board in an attempt to contact their dead dog on the night before the fire. This beloved family pet was dismembered and killed by the mother's husband, Paul Carroll, who initially claimed he killed the dog because it became possessed following a previous Ouija board session. Paul was sentenced later that month for causing unnecessary suffering to an animal. Following the Ouija board session where the mother and daughter attempted to contact their deceased dog, their neighbor Donna Sowerby revealed that Katrina Livingstone had confessed that the Ouija board had predicted their deaths. Number 5. St. Andrew's Boarding School in Delaware is a well-known private boarding school with a very positive reputation, which may make it more surprising that a group of boys snuck out past curfew one night to use a Ouija board in the woods. The group of 4 came prepared, equipped with candles and a flat surface to place the board and candles on. The 4 boys asked the board various questions, playing religiously, trying not to make a joke of it. There was no movement until one of the boys asked the question, "Will anything bad happen in my future?" The piece then slowly began to move, spelling out the words, "right now." One of the boys, Ferlin Mako, suddenly started twitching and jerking his arms and head. He then turned and focused on one of the boys next to him with a devilish stare before lunging at him and screaming, "I don't know you." The 2 other boys grabbed Ferlin off of him and he shortly passed out. The 3 boys carried him back to his dorm room where they left him in his bed. The next morning, Ferlin showed no signs of remembrance from the previous night. They fessed up and took him to the nurse to see what could have been wrong with him, but of course she didn't have much of an explanation. Number 4. A Redditor who says he was about 12 or 13 was spending the night at his friend Michael's house, goofing around with a Ouija board with Michael and his sister in their basement. They were just kind of scaring themselves, moving the planchette around for fun, not taking it very seriously, when they got a rather disturbing message. They asked the question, "Where are you?" And in response, the planchette started spelling something. I-C-A-N. It continued on until it spelled out the sentence, "I can see you through the window." The 3 kids laughed, thinking one of the others spelled out the phrase. There was a small window in the basement room where they were, and just the backyard and woods past the driveway were visible through the window, though it was much too dark to see anything outside. They all looked at the window anyway as a kind of natural response, and as they did, they heard that sound. The stomach-churning sound of someone or something from outside in the dark backyard at 11:30 at night viciously knocking on the basement window. Being the young kids they were, they all screamed until Michael's dad came rushing downstairs. When they explained what happened to his dad, he took them outside with the backyard lights on to search for anyone who may be lurking around. As soon as they told him about what the Ouija board said, Michael's dad ushered them inside and suggested they go to bed. That was when he stopped believing what the kids had said. Number 3. In 2014, 3 American friends were taken to the hospital after reportedly becoming possessed by evil spirits while playing with a Ouija board. Alexandra Huerta, aged 22, was playing the game with her brother Sergio, aged 23, and 18-year-old cousin Fernando Cuevas at a house in the village of San Juan in southwest Mexico. But minutes into it, she apparently started growling and thrashing around in a trance-like state, as this video captures.
Tranquila ya.
Meanwhile, Sergio and Fernando also reportedly started showing signs of possession, including feelings of blindness, deafness, and hallucinations. Paramedics were called and took the three to the hospital. They restrained Alexandra to prevent her from hurting herself before treating the three with painkillers, anti-stress medication, and eye drops, which seemingly worked. The director of public safety in a nearby town said the medical rescue of these three was very complicated. They had involuntary movements and it was very difficult to transfer them to the nearest hospital because they were so erratic. He said they spoke of feeling numbness, double vision, blindness, deafness, hallucinations, muscle spasms, and difficulty swallowing. Alexandra's parents called paramedics after a local Catholic priest refused to perform an exorcism on the three because they were not regular churchgoers. Number 2. Three brothers were using a Ouija board while their parents were out on a cold, rainy night. They were playing the game on the dining room table with the lights dimmed, asking typical questions. They started with questions like, "What is my name?" and "What is your name?" which didn't summon any responses. Then they asked the question, "Is anybody there?" which caused the planchette to slowly move to the word "yes" at the top of the board. The boys then asked the board, "When will we die?" and the board formed the sentence, "Death comes now." Only minutes later, they received a disturbing phone call. It was the boy's father on the other end, crying hysterically. He told one of the boys that he swerved off the road into a tree and their mom died on impact. The dad later blamed himself for driving without getting enough sleep and said he thought he saw someone standing in the middle of the road, so he tried to swerve out of the way, but the slippery roads only caused him to lose control off the road. Number 1. Frank and Sarah Piscatelli and their friend Joe Pedenzin were in their basement playing with a Ouija board on December 15, 2013. A recent event motivated them to try the Ouija board. Apparently, Frank and Sarah's grandmother contacted her dead husband just days before she passed away using one. Frank and Sarah wanted to contact their grandmother, so they brought along a friend to bring in more energy to the board to increase the chances of getting a response. Instead of contacting their grandmother, however, they allegedly contacted a demon who introduced itself as Zozo. Instead of answering the questions the kids asked, the board spelled out random answers that didn't even relate to the questions. Frank demanded that the demon let them speak to their grandmother, and that's when the lights clicked off in the basement. The power did not go out. They all heard the light switch flick off from the bottom of the stairs. One of them grabbed a flashlight and shined it over to the bottom of the stairs. And for a brief moment, saw a black figure standing by the light switch. Even in the light provided by the flashlight, the figure was completely black. Just as suddenly, the lights turned back on and the figure was gone. The three ran upstairs and locked the basement door. The next day, they tucked the Ouija board back in the closet and never touched it again. Frank and Sarah both agreed that the black figure they saw resembled their grandmother. Ever since I can remember, we've always had one of those old vintage Parker Brother Ouija boards sitting in our closet collecting dust. When I was a kid, I always wondered what it was. From the box, it seemed like a horrible board game, until one day I found out what a Ouija board really is, and immediately dug it out of the closet. I insisted on my brother trying it out with me, and eventually got him to play along. We put our hands on the planchette, and I began asking the typical cliché questions like, "Is there anybody there?" and "Can you answer me?" Other than my brother jokingly moving the planchette around to imitate an answer from some kind of entity, there was no real response. After getting bored, we put the game back in the box. I did a little research that night to find out how to make Ouija boards work. Many people said online that the most ideal environment when using a Ouija board is in a dark room only lit by candles. So when my parents weren't home, I managed to gather like 6 or 7 candles and convinced my brother to try it one more time.
You big dummy.
I lit the candles and set them around the table in the dining room with all the lights out. We tried one more time. I asked again if there was anybody there. The planchette began to move. I told my brother to stop moving it, but he swore he wasn't. I told him to move his hand away, and he did. It kept moving. My brother thought I was messing with him, but I didn't pay attention. The planchette landed on the word yes. I was only 9, so I was legitimately shitting myself. My older brother had to take over. He asked the question, "Are you a good spirit?" There was a 5-second pause before my brother's hand moved along with the planchette to the word no. We both looked at each other, and at this point I ran to my room and shut the door behind me, but he continued on with the so-called game. I heard his muffled voice come from down in the dining room, when all of a sudden I heard him screaming at the top of his lungs. I ran back downstairs to see what was wrong. He was holding up his shirt, revealing a small open wound that almost looked like a claw mark. He told me to set the fireplace immediately, and I obeyed. He threw the thing in the fireplace and told me to never speak of what happened to anybody. We have never used a Ouija board since. I got a call from my cousin who said that he, his brother, his dad, and his best friend were using a Ouija board in their basement. Prior to starting, they took a large porcelain doll out of the room because it was creepy, and placed it in the adjacent room face down on a pile of towels. My cousin took a short break because the board was just spouting nonsense and he had to go to the bathroom. His dad and brother and friends started asking the board questions without him. One of the questions was, who is in the other room? It just started spouting random numbers, and when my cousin came back into the room, his brother said that it wasn't working, that they were going to put it away, and he showed him the answer to the last question he asked, and he said, "Dude, that's my social security number." Then they started to talk to whatever started spewing answers out. It told my cousin he would die in the Air Force. At this point, they tell the entity they're communicating with to prove itself. It then spelled out the word doll, and they immediately got a bad feeling. They opened the door to check on the porcelain doll they had laid in the other room, and when they opened the door, the doll was standing up right in front of the door, staring at them. Everyone freaked out and ran out of the house. His best friend burned the Ouija board, and I think he temporarily went nuts for a few months. My cousin, for some reason, then joined the Air Force, and is on a base in Europe now. I had some of my friends over one night, so we tried out the Ouija board we found in someone's garbage. It had the board and the glass piece that you hold onto. The 4 of us held onto the piece and asked stupid questions, just messing around. At all times, one of us were moving around the glass piece just to try and fool the others. When one of my friends went to the bathroom and the other got bored, it was just me and one of my other friends still holding onto it. I asked the board when I will die, and the piece started slowly moving to the letter T. I laughed, looking at my friend, thinking it was him, but he just told me that he thought it was me. The piece then moved to the letter O, and then M, and then back to O, and then R, and then I realized that it was spelling out the word tomorrow. My friend let go of it, and it stopped moving, so I was convinced that it was him, but he swore left and right it wasn't him. But here's where it gets horrifying. The next day, while walking my dog to the preserve, my dog's collar suddenly snaps and he was free from the leash. He darted into the road and I immediately chased after him, only to hear the horn of an oncoming car blaring and getting louder. I dove as fast as I could out of the way, just barely grazing the car with my foot as it passed. But it didn't end there. The same day, while sitting under the ceiling fan in the kitchen on full blast, I got up to get something out of the fridge, and behind me, I heard a loud crashing sound as all the glass on the table was shattered and everything fell onto the floor. The fan had fallen off the ceiling, and I was inches away from being decapitated. I really don't know if I find it to be a coincidence that the day after the Ouija board said I would die the next day, that I had 2 near-death experiences. All I know is I'm never touching a Ouija board again. I have never really told people about this. We had a huge closet full of old board games, and one of them happened to be a Ouija board. I always wanted to try it out, but my family was always home, and I felt weird trying it in front of them. There was this one weekend that my parents were going to the city, and my brother was going on a Boy Scout campout, so I would have the whole house to myself for a weekend. It might have been pathetic that I was more excited to try out a Ouija board than to party with friends while the house was empty. The weather was terrible, windy and rainy, but I felt that a rainy night would actually make it more ritualistic. Around midnight, I set up the board in my dining room and dimmed the lights. I asked a bunch of questions that generated no answers, so I eventually put the board away and went to bed. I woke up in the middle of the night to hear a creaking noise downstairs by the front door. At first I thought nothing of it, but then I heard it again, and it was closer this time, closer to the stairs. I sat up now. At this point I was getting concerned. Another creaking sound, this time from one of the stairs. I was sure somebody was in my house. This was before cell phones were mainstream, so calling the police wasn't even an option. The creaking sounds were getting closer until they were right outside my door, and then they just stopped. It felt like hours while I laid there clutching my covers, waiting for something to happen. A huge strike of lightning momentarily lit up my bedroom, and I swore I could see some kind of black limb-type objects wrapped around the open door. I tried to hold my breath to be as quiet as possible, but what happened next was the worst part. My door suddenly slammed shut, and I couldn't help but let out a shriek. By now I was completely under my covers, shaking and crying and wanting to scream. All the windows in the house were closed, so there was no draft. I just knew something was going to happen. But nothing happened. I sat under my covers for hours, thinking somebody or something was in the room with me. When the sun started to rise, I finally snuck a peek out of my covers. My room was just as empty as before. I somehow found the courage to leave my bedroom and search for any signs of a break-in. Everything looked normal though. No broken windows or unlocked doors. I then spotted the Ouija board on the table again. I have always been kind of superstitious, so I immediately linked the happenings to the Ouija board. I chucked the damn thing in the outside trash can and brought it out front to the curb. Since then, nothing has happened, and I didn't tell anybody about it. You wouldn't understand unless you were in that kind of situation. Then you would agree that nobody would believe a word you say. Nobody really knows except for the people that read my story online. I know for a fact that those events were linked to the Ouija board. I can tell you from personal experience that trying a Ouija board is a huge mistake. It was the summer of 2013. My friend had a vintage Ouija board that was allegedly worth a decent amount of money. My friend agreed to trade it with me for a video game that I never played, so I happily made the trade. I tried using it alone, but it proved to be just a scam. I didn't really expect it to work. I mainly got it just for the money to be made off of it. I threw the stupid thing on the floor of my living room and forgot about it. Everything was going normal until the next morning. I woke up and found that the 2 plants I had sitting on my coffee table had been knocked over, and the Ouija board was sitting on the table. I didn't remember putting it there, nor did I understand how the plants could have fallen over. Wind was definitely not an answer. I wondered if it was possible that I had sleepwalked, or maybe I was half awake and walked down to get a glass of water and bumped into them or something. I moved everything back in place, but the carpet already had dirt stains on it. I brought the Ouija board box up to my room and tossed it on the floor. Things got bad that night. While laying awake in the dark, I was disturbed by the sound of a muffled click. I looked up, not sure what it was, and then I saw through the cracks of my closet door that my closet light was on. I had no idea how it could have turned on, but I got up and opened the closet door anyway. There was nobody in there, but that hadn't even crossed my mind. I turned the light off and jumped back into bed. Probably 10 minutes later, I heard the same clicking sound. Naturally, I looked to the closet and felt my heart sink a little. The closet light was on again. A mix of confusion and fear started building up inside of me. I once again turned off the light and cautiously got back in my bed. I found myself waiting for the closet light to click on again, but what happened instead was much worse. Instead of the closet light turning on, the whole room suddenly filled with light as I heard the main light switch flick on. I had seen enough and was out the door within seconds. I quickly pieced things together and chucked that old Ouija board in the closest dumpster. Nothing weird ever happened after that.
A surprising amount of people have Ouija boards just sitting in their closets somewhere collecting dust, and most people probably have never even used them. I found out what Ouija boards are when I was 16, and when I asked my parents if we had one in our house, my mom told me yes, she did have one buried somewhere in the closet with all the board games. That closet was in the basement by the laundry room, the small closet with a bunch of my parents' old stuff. I was intrigued to try using a Ouija board because I was slightly superstitious. I had my mom help me dig through this closet without disrupting the integrity and neatness of how she sorted everything in there. And lo and behold, eventually she finds this old dusty box that simply said Ouija and had two hands holding the piece that moves around the board called the planchette. The box was kind of falling apart on the edges, even though my mom said they'd only used it a couple times ever. The first thing I did was text a few of my friends to come use the Ouija board with me that weekend when I'd be home alone, to make it scarier. My friend Liam, who was 17, had a car, so he picked up my friend Jack and they came right over. It was like 9 p.m. It was dark out, obviously, and my parents were gone for a couple nights. My younger brother of 2 years, Adam, was also home, so I asked him to join as well. We were going to play on the floor in the loft, which was converted into my bedroom. We turned off the lights and then turned on a flashlight and put it on the floor in the corner of the room, pointed towards the board. All four of us sat on one side of the board and we held the planchette and started asking questions. None of us had ever done this before, so we asked basic questions. I said, if there's someone there, move the planchette. Then for the first time, it started to move to the word yes. Adam asked, how old are you? And the planchette moved from the number 6 to 7, 67. We looked at each other, and while I suspected one of them were moving it, and I'm sure the others did too, we all played along and didn't break immersion. We took turns asking questions. Eventually, I asked the board, are you a demon? And the planchette went to the word yes. At this point, we all laughed and broke immersion, knowing one of us was messing around. At that moment, the flashlight turned off, and all of us stopped laughing and got really scared. Who did that? Someone asked. But it was clearly none of us. The flashlight was all the way in the corner. I crawled to get it and kept pressing the button. It wouldn't turn back on. I turned on my bedside lamp, and I saw the freaked out expressions on my friend's and brother's face. I said that was the most terrifying moment for the battery to die, but also part of me believed it wasn't a coincidence. We stopped playing after that moment, and we even left my room and went to the backyard just because we were all freaked out being in the house at that moment. I had to sleep in that room that night though, and when my friends left and Adam eventually went to sleep, I knew I had to as well. I put the Ouija board back in the box and brought it downstairs out of my room. I just felt weird sleeping in the same room as it that night. As soon as I turned off the light, I just tried to go to sleep right away, not sitting on my phone for an hour or whatever, like I usually do. As I was starting to finally drift off into a half-sleep state, something in my closet fell over. I immediately rose up and looked in the direction of the closet door. I flicked on the bedside lamp and walked over to the closet. It was a small walk-in closet where I kept some of my clothes. There's a light switch on the outside of the closet that turned on a single light bulb inside of it. I flicked it on and looked down at the crack at the bottom of the door. There were what looked to be two shadows cast by feet on the other side of the door. As soon as I saw this, I started screaming at him and ran to his room. I explained to him what I just saw and led him to my room to show him. When he came to my room, the light in the closet was still on, but the shadows at the bottom of the door weren't there anymore. I opened the door, and there was nobody in the closet, but there was something on the floor. It was a wooden box that I made in arts and crafts that I would put childhood memorabilia in. It somehow fell over and the contents spilled onto the floor. There is no draft in the world that would have knocked that over. It made no logical sense. I slept in my parents' bed that night and then the next, and for a week after that I slept in the spare bedroom. Eventually I would start sleeping in my own bed again, but I would never forget that night. I haven't touched a Ouija board since. I had never used a Ouija board until I was in my mid-20s. It was never something that interested me, but my friend George was very briefly talking to this girl who was into that sort of thing. Her name was Mandy. She was into exploring abandoned and allegedly haunted places. One day he invited me to go with them and her friend to this apparently haunted abandoned house about a half-hour drive away. He guaranteed me the friend was cute in order to entice me to go. I didn't have anything going on that night, so I said, why not? We would be doing this late at night. George picked me up first around 11 p.m., and then we drove to pick up the girls from this park. I had already met Mandy once, but not her friend. Her friend Carly had red hair, a nose ring, and sleeve on her right arm. Mandy had already been to this house before, and she said it was high in activity, a term I'd never heard till that point, but obviously could put together what she meant. I smiled a bit as she said it because I honestly laughed to myself. I don't believe in the paranormal myself, so I found it a little humorous. Mandy brought this big bag with her, so during the drive I asked what's inside. And then she goes and pulls out this box, a Ouija board box, and then she pulls out a candle. Then George said, oh, that's the surprise. Apparently her surprise to George was that we would be using a Ouija board in this abandoned house. I'm gonna be honest, that didn't sound super fun to me, but I was there for the adventure. Mandy directed George where to park when we got close. It was this really dark street with no streetlights, with an open field on one side and trees on the other. The house driveway was gated off, so we had to walk from there. We walked through some woods that led us to the backyard of the house. From there, Mandy led us to the back window that she climbed through last time. It was a bit high up, so we had to help the girls up, and we just climbed in ourselves, and we walked around the house for a bit. All the furniture was still inside, but it was just decrepit. It hadn't been lived in for probably decades. I don't scare easily, and I must admit, being in there at night was very eerie. It would probably be terrifying alone. It was dead silent besides our footsteps on the creaky floors. There were some old portraits of people hung on the wall. They looked like they were taken in the 50s, which made me wonder how old this house was and what was the story behind it. Most likely the couple living there died and there was no family left to claim the house. Mandy set up the board on the floor and she lit these 2 candles. I could tell she was really into this stuff. She took lead with this, asking a bunch of spiritual questions. The planchette piece didn't move for the first few questions as she kept asking, is anyone there, can anyone hear, etc. Eventually, it started to spell out the word hello. I laughed and looked at George, who laughed back. But the girls were serious and even said stop laughing. Out of respect, I did stop smiling and put a serious face on. Mandy asked, what's your name? And the planchette moved around the board slowly to spell out the name Gregory. She then asked, how long have you been dead? And then it moved around to spell out 30 years. I didn't believe any of this for a second. I knew Mandy or Carly were doing this. This went on for some time, and we played along, until there was a huge thump from upstairs in the house. We all jumped and let go of the planchette. George said, is someone up there? and Mandy insisted it could be Gregory. Mandy and Carly put their hands back on the planchette and asked, "Gregory, did you make that sound?" And George and I stopped her and said we need to leave if someone's upstairs. Then we watched as the planchette moved to the word yes. At this point, George and I were convinced the girls were pranking us, and that they had someone upstairs trying to scare us. Then we heard footsteps above us. There was no denying these sounds were footsteps. George and I agreed to go upstairs and check it out, expecting to find someone trying to prank us. The girls kept saying, "No, come back down." We went up the extremely creaky steps and entered the first open door we found. It was a bedroom. The furniture and everything in the room was extremely decayed. And then there was this door, right in the corner of the room. Most likely a closet. It was cracked open, and we whispered to each other that we thought we heard something in the closet. I put my finger up to my lips to tell him to be quiet, and we listened. When we heard a clear exhale behind the door, we both quickly left the room. We hurried downstairs, expecting to find the girls still in the living room, but they were gone. The candles, the Ouija board, everything. There was just darkness in the house now. We didn't even hear them sneak out. We left, through the window again, in a hurry and ran to the car. George tried calling Mandy's phone multiple times, but it went straight to voicemail every time. She blocked him. They were nowhere to be found either. We went straight to the car and drove home. George never heard from that girl again. He only hung out with her 2 times. He didn't know where she lived or anything. We did form our own crazy theory that they were in fact trying to trap us somehow, and the footsteps upstairs were from somebody they knew. It's also possible they never left the house, and that they were hiding somewhere inside. The more superstitious out there may believe that we did in fact speak to a spirit though, and something more supernatural was going on. In October of 2015, when I was a junior in high school, I was in my horror phase where I was obsessed with everything scary and supernatural. With Halloween coming up, I was also reading a lot of scary stories about Ouija boards and people's experiences with them. My curiosity was piqued, and so I ordered a Ouija board off Amazon, and when it arrived, I waited till a night our parents were not home to use it. I convinced my little sister to try it with me. We were at the dining room table with the lights dimmed, both of us holding the planchette. I asked the board some questions, and my sister and I both laughed because it was kind of awkward and funny. I started to move the piece around, trying to creep out my sister, but she knew it was me doing it. After a few minutes of doing this, we were starting to get bored, and my sister wanted to stop. I said let's try for a few more minutes. After a little bit more waiting for the planchette to move from some unseen entity, we decided to give up. My sister went to her room after this, and I went to mine. I looked up more Ouija board stories online and kept reading people's experiences with them, and then I looked up why it didn't work for us. Other people had said their first time using Ouija boards nothing had happened, so I decided I would try again. That night around 1 a.m., when my sister was already asleep, I went back down to the dining room and dimmed the lights again. I once again tried to use the Ouija board, asking similar questions as a few hours ago, just in a lower voice to not wake up my sister. I held the planchette with both hands, waiting for it to move, but it never did. Instead, I heard sounds from upstairs, like soft footsteps. It could have been my sister. She might have heard me down here. The footstep-type sounds were followed by a muffled female voice. It didn't sound quite like my sister though, and the voice was coming from directly above me. The room above the dining room was our older brother's room, who was away at college. My sister wouldn't have been in there. I went up the stairs quietly, and I heard the voice getting louder as I got closer to my brother's room. It was coming from in there. I was curious if my sister was playing a prank on me, changing her voice to sound lower to scare me. I got to the door and put my ear up against it. I heard the voice of what sounded like an older woman. I wasn't sure how my sister could be doing a voice like that. At first I didn't know what was being said, until I realized that the voice kept saying, "Grandma's here, Georgie," over and over. It was the voice of my dead grandma. I felt every hair in my body stand up. I opened the door and turned on the light, and no one was inside. The voice had stopped. I ran to my room and shut the door and locked it and curled up under the covers. I felt the whole room spinning as I couldn't form any rational thoughts of what just happened. It was too vivid to have imagined it. When I calmed down, I did a prayer before going to sleep. Or at least trying to go to sleep. I was awake all night. I still remember this night just as vividly 8 years later.